what I want to talk to you about today really is the journey we've been on over summer, speaking to lots of different organisations about how they've coped managing change during COVID, and I wanted to share those findings with you, and hopefully get some feedback from you guys as to whether or not that's resonates with you and your experience of working during 2020. So what I will do is make a start, and I think Chris, who's helping us with the technical side, will just let people in as they join. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with you, and just walk you through some of the lessons that we've learnt through the summer. So let me just set it up as a presentation, and then I can share with you. So can you see that okay?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so it's on a side screen for me, so I may keep looking over here, just so that we're all talking about the same thing. So I'm from a small business, which is Trueman Change, and what we do is we help mainly local government organisations to manage change. And as I said, what I want to do is just share with you some information about some work that we've been doing over the summer, speaking to lots of organisations about how they've managed to do that this year, because I think there's a huge amount of learning there. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a kind of practical thing that you can do to take away as well. And I do tend to work in quite an informal way, so please do feel free to chip in, to ask any questions. You can do it through the chat, or you can just unmute. And we're doing this really to research. So I'm really interested in your feedback as well about how things have been for you this summer and what your organisation has taken away. So very much a kind of interactive session. So I'm Managing Director of Trueman Change. I've worked probably for about the last 15 years in lots of different councils, helping them to set up and deliver change journeys and change programmes. So some of that's been council-wide change, some of it's been very specific work. I've done some work around kind of setting up shared services and partnerships, done some work around workforce transformation, and some very specifics. I'm doing some work at the moment in London around an adult social care transformation programme. But the vast majority of my experience is in local government, and I kind of don't want to move away from that. I really do enjoy working in local government. Last year's conference, last year's CCIN conference, we actually had a stand and we asked a question which was, what's hard about change? And it's kind of nice looking back at this, but I have to say, what is missing on it, which none of us predicted, is the global pandemic. And I think that's the thing that's really thrown lots of organisations into huge disarray, and not just on an organisational level, but a personal level too. So speaking personally, in April, we lost my dad to COVID, so I was quite personally hit and took a little bit of time away from work. But as I came back, what I started to do was speak to my colleagues and friends who I've known for years, who work in different organisations around the country, and was just really blown away by the sheer amount of change that happened so very, very quickly. And what was interesting about that change was that it happened. It wasn't new change. So the problem was new, but some of the things that organisations had to do, like very rapidly work from home, actually they're things that the organisations have been talking about for a long time. So I felt, as somebody that's worked in change for a long time, there's got to be some mammoth amounts of learning here. And I think we all, when I talk to people about change programs, lots of people have a war story. Most people have a war story of a change program that they've been through at work that went wrong, where it's cost money, it's cost morale, it's, you know, taken up massive amounts of resources and not delivered what it needed to. And yet actually we've managed to make change happen extremely quickly and in a very different way than we have done before. And I felt that there was some real valuable learning from that to take away from what's been a really difficult situation for most organisations, all organisations. So COVID affected everyone, and I think that's been one of the unique things about this issue, is that everybody has been affected on a personal level, on a work level. There isn't anybody this hasn't touched, and it may be that it's affected us all in very different ways. Some people will have been worried about jobs, some people have been worried about themselves, their health, their family members, but I don't think there are many people that this hasn't touched in some way. And I think what's really interesting as well is that often so much of the conversation around organisations is focused on the private sector, but in many ways, some private sector organisations did have the ability to furlough people, they had the ability to sort of take a step back. Public sector organisations did not have that ability, and people in local government had to rally very, very quickly to get their residents looked after, to get them fed, to make sure they could get the medicine that they needed. There was an immediate response, and it was huge amounts of change at a very, very rapid pace. So in the past, we would have expected to be able to plan, we would have expected to be able to, you know, kind of do roadmaps and set up governance, and that ability to do those things wasn't there. What's interesting though is, as I said, some of those responses were in fact things that we've been talking about for a long time. Lots of local government organisations have been talking for a long time about wanting to work from home or more flexibly or more remotely. We've been talking for a long time about working with partners and communities in a different way. And in some ways what happened was COVID accelerated those things. But it also, in some of the organisations that we spoke to, it kind of accelerated a different leadership style, which I have to say, and that's the reason why I wanted to speak to you guys today, a lot of the things that we found were very closely aligned with a lot of our principles as an organisation, as a cooperative, in terms of that kind of collaborative way of leading rather than a top-down way of leading. The pace of change was very different. It was unlike things that have been seen before. So we have got lots of experience, I think, in the sector of crisis management, and, you know, and different councils will have dealt with crises in different ways at different times. You know, people reference back to their learning from dealing with things like floods, but I think it's been something that's been quite unique in terms of how large scale it's been. What they have done is also had to create new models of how to meet residents' needs overnight. So, you know, suddenly moving those goalposts to a place where people can't leave their house, that was a new problem and happened very quickly. And actually what COVID did seem to create was this sense of shared purpose. So what we did was we spoke to a large number of people from different organisations, and some of those conversations were one-to-one. Some of them, quite a lot of them, we ran Zoom workshops that were free for anybody to attend, where we were just gathering that feedback. We were running panel sessions and getting kind of advice and insight from people, not just in local government, in various sectors. So we spoke to people like chief execs, directors, and some people were kind of self-employed consultants or psychologists. We spoke to political leaders, we spoke to change managers, HR people, a real variety. And we spoke to them from different sectors. Now, because my background is local government, we did have a high proportion of local government people that we spoke to, but we also spoke to people from universities, from private sector, from NHS organisations, which was very interesting, leisure services, a real mix of people. And these conversations are ongoing, so we want to keep up this work. And we created a white paper, which is really just a fairly short paper where we put 7 key lessons. So once we had quite a few of these conversations, we started to see themes of things that kept coming up time and time again. So we've put that together, and that's available for free on our website. And we can certainly share a copy of that with you and get that sent around to everybody that's on the call. So what I wanted to do was just quickly talk you through what each of those lessons were. And all I'm doing here with each of the lessons is I'm just going to give you a little bit of a spiel of what it means, and we'll put some quotes up on the screen for you to see. If these are direct quotes of what people said, to illustrate what these lessons were. So the first one was really just constantly there was people commenting on the sense of passion and the sense of purpose as to how that enabled organisations to make change happen very quickly. And one of the reasons that I love working in local government is because I get that sense of passion and purpose. You know, people that go and work in local government are doing it because they care very passionately about their local communities. I think even with a high standard anyway, that was absolutely ignited by COVID. And one of the things that I think is a real learning for change is that often when we set up change programs, we don't always connect it back to that why people come to work, why people want to do that job. So some of the things that people were saying was that, you know, the whole country had a shared purpose, although there might have been specific in specific organisations. everybody had a single issue, whether that was that we need to make sure people get fed, whatever that single issue was, regardless of job title or position in the organisation, there was a sense of clarity of we all need to pull together and make this happen. One person particularly commented on the fact that it was unique in that, even your frontline staff, your corporate teams, your procurement people, your finance people, everybody rallied around that same goal, that for that particular organisation was setting up a hub to make sure that people could get the food that they needed. So I think that's a crucial thing going forward, is make sure whenever we're starting on any change programme, we are very, very clear on a sense of purpose, so that ignites passion and people can understand what it is. The second lesson was just take action, just do something, just make it happen. And this was really about the pace. And there was a real sense of not necessarily feeling as though you had to wait until something was perfect. Actually, we know what we need to do. We're going to try this. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. So there was a letting go of some of that more kind of controlling way of planning change to the nth degree. Actually, we know roughly what we need to do, so let's just make a start, let's make something happen. And there was a sense of, immediacy about it. So there wasn't the luxury, I guess, of planning to the nth degree. And there was talk about, in some cases, actually, kind of not following the normal rules that we would. And I guess time will tell as we go through this journey whether or not that we look back with hindsight and think maybe we were reckless or maybe we did the right thing. But there was a sense of we need to take action that I think often in sort of more traditional change programs, we don't always have that pressure and that urgency. Lesson number 3, and I know that this I will be preaching to the converted here because you are all members of CCIN, that importance of partnerships. And I think that the organisations that did really well at making stuff happen very quickly during COVID were organisations that had already done the groundwork and already had very good relationships with their partners. I think that would have been a huge barrier if those partnerships weren't in place. We had somebody who's a CEO of a council-funded leisure trust who was describing a shift to a much more collaborative, community-based model, and actually said a phrase which I loved, was that they were establishing connections rather than contracts. So a move away from that kind of transactional relationship that often partnerships do get caught up in, service level agreements and who's paying for what and counting the funding. Actually, this was, we've got a problem, we've all got to pull together and make it happen. So I think that investment in partnerships of people that you need and your communities is absolutely crucial. Lesson 4 was about being aware of emotions, and that came from 2 sides. So in some cases, people were talking about being very mindful of the emotional journey that their teams and their partners and the people that they worked with were going through. As I said earlier, this is something that's affected everybody in some way. So everybody's had an emotional impact because of COVID, but also some leaders talked about that from the perspective of being aware of their own emotions. There were other people as part of these goals that had lost family members, that had, were going through experience that had taken a huge emotional toll on them. And actually they were having to kind of put that brave face on and go to work. So there was something around an honesty of really understanding yourself and your emotions. Now, hopefully, normally, a change journey wouldn't ignite quite such a level of emotion, but it does ignite some, and I think some awareness of that and actually working to combat that and support other people around you was really crucial. Reduce bureaucracy. This came from various different sectors. It wasn't just local government, and people in higher education talked about it, people in the NHS talked about it. And again, I guess this is similar to that take action lesson, which was very much around asking for forgiveness rather than permission. And I think all organisations, once they get to a certain size, particularly if they're quite a complex organisation, can very easily, in the drive to bring in consistency and systems, can in fact actually just end up tied up in bureaucracy. And I think it was really liberating for some organisations to let go of some of that bureaucracy, and actually some are making a very, very conscious effort to make sure that they are critically assessing what do we need to do and what are we doing just out of habit. I think change and transformation, I always joke and say that I'm not a particularly good project manager because I always want to do the bare minimum project management. We can very easily tie ourselves up in paperwork rather than actually getting to that common purpose and getting to the end goal. So a really strong lesson there, I think. This was one of my favourites, which was be human, not hierarchical. There was lots of conversation about the different ways in which we are working now, you know, even ourselves on calls like this right now. It's made senior people much more accessible. It's made people more human in a sense that, you know, we can see each other in our homes now. I have a kitten asleep next to me that does have a habit of waking up in the middle of a call when I'm trying to be professional. And I think it's actually been quite eye-opening and nice to see people in those settings, to see people's family members and kids and dogs and cats, and also to reduce some of that hierarchy. So we talked to some leaders that were making a real effort to embrace that, people that were, you know, kind of going out for a run and then doing a quick video to encourage their staff to, you know, not necessarily go for a run, but take a break from their screen. There's just been something about reducing that hierarchy and empowering people to kind of just run with it and make change happen in a I don't want to say less professional because that sounds like a negative thing, but in a more human way, and I think that's really positive. And then the final lesson was communicate, communicate, communicate. And so much so that when we ran our second round of events, we actually run one specifically on communication. And I think so much has changed with communication because we are now using channels that previously were available to us and we might have used if there was a specific reason to, but things have become much more normal. But also, although it's easy to communicate via video and perhaps more accessible for some people, what it can do is alienate others. So it doesn't work for everybody. And the fact that people are working more remotely means that that communication is even more important. So people talked about, we had a deputy leader of a council that talked about having daily kind of quick stand-up calls in the morning. We talked about people making videos. We talked about people kind of doing online quizzes and social events. Lots of organisations made a real effort to completely change the way that they communicated with their people, their residents and their partners. And I think that communication became two-way. So we also had conversations with people who wanted to do staff surveys to get a feel for where staff were, where their emotions were, and make sure that wherever possible people were being supported in the best way that they can. It isn't perfect, and I think we do have to be mindful that a remote way of working can work particularly well for some people and not as well for others. I had conversations with a couple of directors of children's services who were saying that actually for their staff there's quite a high proportion of newly qualified social workers. They're quite new to their role. It's a very emotionally demanding role, and for them to be kind of isolated or working from home with their own family near them, you know, sometimes that proxy of having a journey to work when you're dealing with something so challenging, it is hugely beneficial. So it isn't perfect and it doesn't work for everybody, but what it has done is it's allowed organisations to radically rethink how they communicate. The extra session we did on comms was really interesting and actually focused quite a bit on external comms as well, and how different local authorities had different challenges. So we had Blackburn Council on the call, which is my hometown where I live, where there's been a lot of extra restrictions and a lot of changes in those extra restrictions over recent weeks. We also had somebody from Bournemouth on the call who'd had a real specific challenge around people descending to the beaches there. So that whole external comms piece had been really interesting as well. And I certainly think that the comms professionals in local government have been on the front line as much as anybody in recent weeks and months. So those were our lessons, and I guess I just wanted to take a moment really to link back to the CCIN principles, because actually there were so many common things in there, and I know that some of the lessons from how organisations made change happen during COVID are not news. You know, we know in change management that having a burning platform can help. We know that getting people on the journey can help. We know that having a sense of purpose can help. But very often we might know those things, but we don't seem to quite get there in terms of acting upon them and building change programs around them. And actually a lot of those things around better engagement with partners and the community, I really could see some huge synergies with the CCIN principles, which I think is really heartwarming, because I think what it has shown is that through the summer, you know, when it's been really difficult, extremely difficult times for everyone, actually going back to those core principles is what organisations outside of our network, you know, kind of went back to those kind of principles and learned from those kind of principles that we live and breathe as a network. So I think that's hugely positive. The thing that I want to share with you that is a little practical tool of a way that you can use this, and please do feel free to contact our inbox, which is hello@truemanchange.co.uk, and I can send you a copy of this. But one of the things that I've been encouraging organisations to do is just kind of, if those are those 7 lessons, then take 20 minutes to sit down and have a think about where your organisation is with those lessons. So when it comes to, if you are planning more change in your organisation, which I think, you know, we all know change is the new way, it's the new constant, then what can we take from the change that happened this summer? You know, do we have a clear purpose? Is everybody clear? Do we know what actions we can take, or are we still very much in that theoretical place? Who are the partners? How can you be aware of your emotions? Where might you reduce paperwork? How can you communicate, and how can you be authentic and human, and how can you bring that into your leadership style? And then think about what your next steps are. And I think really it's nice to reflect and it's nice to have those lessons, but it's always important to have something practical that you can kind of go back to and check, because as I said, even though none of those things are new, they are a very helpful reminder to just keep on track in such a complex world where things are moving so quickly. It's quite easy for change programs to get a little bit carried away. So we would love you to be involved. We're still very much on this journey of trying to engage with as many people as possible. We run a free online event every 3 to 4 weeks where we pick a topic and we do a Zoom call. We get panel members. We're always looking for panel members. So if you would like to talk and represent your organisation and talk about what your journey has been and how you've learned how to make things happen very quickly and work in a very different way, then we would love to hear from you. But also if you'd like to just, you know, dial in and listen to them, then you're very welcome to. Our website is truemanchange.co.uk, and there's an events page on there that you can take a look at. You can also download the paper at truemanchange.co.uk downloads, but you can contact me and I'm happy to share that paper with you. I'd really like to open the floor if there are any questions or if anybody wants to share their reflections. I do have a colleague on the call, Lizzie, who works for me part-time, but also is a county councillor for Lancashire Council part-time as well. So she may have a perspective that she wants to share from her council perspective. But I would love to hear what you guys have learned and how it's been for you. I will stop sharing my screen. Then I can see the chat function, or can I see the chat function? I don't think I can without stopping sharing. Oh, hang on, I'm in the wrong bit, that's why. This is what happens when you've got 2 screens. Sharon, you have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I didn't put a question in the chat box, that's my fault. Lucy, one of the areas we've been looking at very closely is how we monitor the ongoing impact of the changes to working practices for our staff. I know this is very varied. I've got 2 daughters, both of whom have been juggling for the last few months. Their children are back at school now, but they were juggling home educating, home working. One of them has a child under 2, so her childcare wasn't functional while the lockdown was on, so she had an under 2-year-old. It's been incredibly stressful. I know that parenting is done differently in different families, but I think there's been a very big impact on women particularly. All parents will have struggled with it. So there's been a different impact. Some people absolutely love home working and really embrace it and have really enjoyed it. Others not so much so. And I think my question is around that kind of the change management of, well, we've been forced into this situation, so we've had to do this, but what do we do going forward to manage this virtual working environment so that it's not a monoculture. We're not assuming everybody will be really happy with working from home, and some people will really struggle with it. And we've been looking at, you know, how we have that ongoing dialogue with staff to make sure that we are constantly taking the temperature of that. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. I mean, having to put this conference all online has been I was really looking forward to going to Telford. I have to say that I have that knot of anxiety in my stomach, and I will have until we finish at 5 o'clock tomorrow about this, because it's not familiar territory to me, and we're all wrestling with this. So any thoughts on that would be welcome.
Yeah. So I firstly want to say I think you guys have done a great job at this conference. I think it's been really well organised, and I think, you know, from a person's perspective that's been on the conference, it's been really easy to see the different sessions go into it, and so I think you've done a great job. In terms of the working from home, I think it's wildly different for different people, and I do think organisations are often guilty of swinging like a pendulum. So, you know, and at the moment that pendulum is working from home. So a lot of organisations we're usually in the office and predominantly in the office, and now we've swung that pendulum and we're all predominantly working from home. But you see that pendulum swing in different topics, and actually the answer is almost always in the middle, and it's getting some balance of that. I think that I'm one of those people that have really loved it. I'm used to working up and down the country, so for me to be at home has been a real luxury. But as I said when I was referencing social workers, for some people, because of the type of work they do, it's really not appropriate, and it's very, very challenging. And then for some people, because of personal circumstances, and I will ask Lizzie, my colleague, to comment, because she also has young children, and it's been a challenge for her. I think there's something for leaders about being aware of that. I think there's a risk that we assume everybody's like us, and that we assume that working from home is okay for everybody. I think that there's also a risk that we just kind of we replace that presenteeism in the office with a presenteeism at the screen, which isn't really effective, and it doesn't work for everybody. So I think making people feel as though they should be sat at a screen from 8 till 5 or whatever those times are isn't a productive way of working. My dream, but it's a pipe dream, is that we can move our entire culture to a complete way of working that is more driven by outcomes and outputs rather than hours, but our entire employment law system is set up around hours. I think being able to be clear with your people, these are what I need you to achieve. I'm not actually bothered what time that is achieved or how that is achieved. It would be my dream for moving forward, but I don't know where to start with that, because, as I say, at a national level, we're very tied into well, it's 37 hours a week, and this is the time that it is. Lizzie, do you want to add anything? Because I know from working personally with you, and you're juggling 2 jobs, of being a counsellor and working with Trueman Change and 2 young children, and I know you're an avid feminist, so I'm sure you'll...
Yes, it is really difficult, and Lucy will have seen various... I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, various children climbing on me and interrupting meetings, and it is extremely stressful. And I think it's that thing of not trying to have a one-size-fits-all solution, and being very aware that the people who are making decisions about the setup of future working environments are very likely to have nicer homes, are very likely to have the sort of stuff that makes it easier to work from home. So like money to buy a nice chair, or, you know, just space in the house. I mean, even in a 3-bed semi with 2 of us working from home, it's, you know, it feels cramped, and you get fed up of seeing each other. you know, and Lucy mentioned feminism. So in our family, the reason that I got stuck with the kids for 6 months was because my husband is working directly on COVID response stuff for the NHS. But on a wider scale, women tend to earn less. They tend to be more likely to work part-time anyway, and there's a cultural expectation that they're the ones who are going to be doing the childcare, and it really has fallen on women far more to take on those childcare tasks. And I think as organisations, we need to be aware of it and make sure that we're not replicating that expectation. And, you know, maybe doing some work around, you know, keeping the good stuff if people do want to work from home a bit. As Lucy says, we don't want this, you have to be at your desk 9 till 5. Actually, what you want is people being productive. And if that means they take half an hour to go and do the school run, which is what I do every afternoon, then that's what it is, and not just the women. You know? And I think if we do go into another lockdown, and I really hope we won't, and I really hope even if we do, schools and childcare will be the last thing to go. And I think that is now the government's priority, keeping open schools and childcare. But if that does happen, we really need to have a think about how organisations, how we reduce that stress on our people. And a lot of what Lucy was talking about is how we do it, and just being understanding and being people. You know, I think most people are, but I think where you are in an organisation can often determine your experience of it. So if you're a leader, or you're a county councillor, for example, you have a lot more power to get away with things. You know, if you're not in a customer facing role, it's a lot easier for you to look after the kids or work flexibly. But what happens if you are in a customer facing role? Are you being, and you maybe don't have a lot of power in the organisation, are you being supported? You know, and being used to working from home as a county council, I quite like it. But it really isn't for everyone. So it'd be interesting to see how organisations take that challenge on board and don't do as Lucy said, a pendulum swing to the other side.
And I think some organisations, like what you're saying with you, Sharon, that you're trying to do those check-ins with people and make sure, you know, getting that open and honest feedback is really crucial. And I think that leading by example, which is often what people were talking about on our calls with that be human, you know, this is hard for everybody. We're all struggling, and taking on board completely what Lizzie says, that's people in more senior positions, you know, if we were to make the assumption people in more senior positions may have had easier options in terms of their living arrangements and their ability to buy equipment and so on, there is still something about, you know, modelling that behaviour of it's okay if a child runs across or you know, there's a kitten in the screen or whatever that is. I think modelling that human behaviour so people, it doesn't become a source of anxiety. I think some people, I've actually never been good at separating work and life. I've always been who I am. You know, anybody that works with me knows if I've had an argument with my fella, and I've not been good at separating that. But I know a lot of people are, and a lot of people that to remove that barrier, it's been difficult. So I think we probably need to model a little bit of that removing that barrier to hopefully make people feel more comfortable if they can't be the super professional self that they would want to be in work, because it's just a different situation at the moment. I don't know if that's helped. I feel like I've not answered it.
I think from the change management point of view, I've been quite concerned to hear lots of talk about, oh, we don't need all this property anymore. You know, we can get rid of it because we're not going to have people working in the office, and you know, people taking giant leaps. That it may be that's what happens, and if it does, then that's what it will be. But because of the financial situation of local government, and I think the other impact of this is, you know, when we thought this was just going to be for a few months and then we'd be done, it's a very different prospect from if this is the future way we're going to we're going to be working now. And so that's why I think, as you know, as leaders of organisations, we need to be constantly checking in with people, and if it's not okay for some people, we need to have that conversation with them about what would help them to.
Could I jump in on that, Sharon? Because there's actually something that I didn't mention that I think I ought to have done, and Lucy touched on it a bit. There's a really tricky piece of work, and I'm not sure I've got the answers as to how we do it, but people for whom home isn't a safe or a good place, and how we build that into our processes for making decisions about who works from home and who doesn't, without forcing people to disclose really very personal information. There will obviously be some sort of element of disclosure, perhaps, but you know, nobody really wants to go to their line manager and tell them, well, I'm sorry, I can't work from home because my partner drinks all day and gets angry and hits me if I'm at home. That's not an easy thing to say to a line manager. So I think something that organisations really need to take on board, and I'm not sure I know how you do it perfectly, but how do we get the system in place which allows for the fact that not everyone's lives are nice at home, as well as just, you know, personal preference for working in a more formal environment.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, Lizzie. We have a very big domestic abuse programme here in Stevenage, and for lots of reasons. It's not always partners, but it can be parents, and you know, relationships between parents and children aren't very good sometimes. There are lots of reasons, and you may have, you know, as many as 4 or 5 adults in a house trying to work from home. That's not very practical in most of the houses around here. You know, and there is no doubt that the whole experience through COVID has been very stressful, and if relationships are stressed anyway, it makes it far worse, this situation. So I do think they're big issues that we've all got to think about and face up to going forward. And I think, you know, from a change management point of view, if we are going to change to a more virtual way of working, we can't ignore these issues. They will exacerbate the inequalities that were already very prevalent, still far too prevalent in the workplace.
Yeah, and a challenge for us at Trueman Change at the moment is we are recruiting, and we've actually put on the advert that we're happy for the position to be completely home working, or we're happy to provide office space if that's better. But we also want to take part in the Kickstart scheme, and I'm genuinely worried about taking somebody on that's quite young in their career, that this may be their first job. What is the experience of that young person going to be for their first job if they are sat in a room, probably in their family's home? They've probably not got their own home if they're quite young. You know, how do they, all that learning that you get just by proxy of, you know, the learning of how to behave in an office environment, and so there's so much still to do, I think. And as you rightly say, we did it in a response to a crisis, but if it is a more long-term solution, I do think there's still lots to think about. From a change management perspective, the single most powerful question that you can ever ask from a change management perspective is, what will be different? Mm-hmm. And I think if you keep asking that question over and over again, but what else could be different? What else would be different? What else would be different? I think that's when you build up that rich picture of, okay, so this is what will be different for employees, what will be different for young employees, what will be different for employees who don't feel safe at home, and asking that question from different perspectives. Even though it's a very simple question, it does kind of force managers and leaders to properly think through what a change will be. But it is something that we don't all have the answers to, because we're all learning as we go, aren't we? And it is such an individual thing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Does anybody else have any questions or any feedback, or want to share anything about how change has happened in your organisation this year? And do feel free to stick your hand up or put it in the chat, whichever you prefer.
Lucy, am I okay to make a contribution?
Yeah, of course you are.
So, you know, absolutely, you know, fascinating to listen to that last conversation, because that's everything we've experienced at the WEA, the full range of that. So working backwards in terms of, you know, we spent the first 4 or 5 weeks congratulating ourselves on getting everybody safe, remote working, getting them the kit they needed, paying them a home working allowance, not furloughing everybody, and then spent the next 4 months thinking, oh shit, yeah, it's not safe for everybody. You know, so we used our employee assistance program partner to create that safe space, and we've prioritized people that want to get back into the office, to get back. And you've talked about adapting the rules and stuff, so we've taken a different approach to lone working, you know, remote check-ins. So we've tried to flex the rules to support people to come back to the office where they needed to. So I get that with all of the people side. I think you know, that old-fashioned idea and stereotype, which I don't think was ever true, that, you know, you leave your personal life at the office door, I think has just been smashed wide open now. And all those conversations that you were having is, how do we embed that in our new ways of working, so that we're looking at people as whole people, you know. And it's not a work-life balance, it's more a work-life blend, and it is what it is. And, you know, if you want to support your people, you take countenance of all of them, you know, everything that's going on. So I get all that, and I'm really interested in how we pick the best of that up and hold on to it going forward. But then if we look at some of the other ones that I think there are a good 7 lessons. If that's right, if there's a fundamentally different way of seeing our people, for us as people that are involved in charitable organisations or public sector, local government, what are the absolute system changes that need to take place as well? So you alluded to one of them, this notion that absolutely everything has to be contract driven, that it has to be professionally procured, and it has to go through a tender process of 3 to 5 contractors with, you know, very difficult to take anything but the lowest price. You know, how do we change that part of the system as well, that says, you know, I think in another meeting we were in, you referenced that's a good process if you buy in some office furniture or you buy in stationery for the local authority. It's not so good if you're trying to build partnerships and bring in people that can really make, you know, long lasting, you know, sustainable change for the, you know, the citizens of our different full members. So I'm as interested in those systemic changes that we can embed on the back of this, as well as the, you know, rightly the issues around our people that we've chatted about.
Yeah, and actually that conversation happened as part of our research. It was a community driven leisure centre chief exec that was driving that conversation, and you see that contractual behaviour even when it's not procurement related. So even if it's not actually buying something from a private sector organisation, a lot of kind of health and social care partnerships get stuck in a place of, yes, but let's count the beans, you know, before we can figure out what the outcome is and who's putting what in, and transactional, who's paying for what. So it is a real challenge, and I think that part of what's driving that challenge is austerity. Because everybody's under so much pressure over money, it turns every conversation back into money. And I have seen organisations in local government where they've had a bit of, you know, we had the crisis and then there was a bit of a breather, and now I think we're going into a second wave, where there was a bit of time spent in that bit of a breather space saying, actually, what amazing things have we done that we can learn from? But then over the weeks, that conversation has become about savings again, which is quite sad. And I do think that's challenging. I hope that if we have these conversations again a year from now, some of that learning has remained, because it is very challenging. I mean, it's challenging for me as in the private sector. I can't imagine how challenging it is for people in the charitable sector to have to be going through things like tendering. But equally, I can completely see it from the perspective of local government, where it's, you know, there's so much scrutiny over how money is spent. But again, it comes back to that shared purpose, and I think if we can change that relationship in a way that still ensures effective use of public money, but perhaps lets go a little bit of some of the bureaucracy, I think that's really powerful, because it's a barrier in lots of different types of relationships, I think.
And there's always a risk, I find, that it then becomes a tick box exercise rather than a value for money exercise. I always, you know, when you think about decisions, it would be nice to go to a system where decisions were recorded and had to be defendable. But it's not about how we filter all these boxes, it's just me when we're looking at our values and our principles as a public sector organisation. And I know that's really hard to get without misuse, but I'm sure there's a better way of doing it. There must be, you know, there must be. And on the health and social care aspect, we, you know, we actually have a health system in my area that got given a structure by the government in 2013 under the Health and Social Care Act, and is now just working around it. Essentially, there's still a lot of barriers. Like Lucy said, as soon as you start talking about pooling budgets, everyone gets a bit wary. But you know, people are working around it, are building partnerships, like despite the system, for us as well.
Yeah, it is. It's a challenge. Is there any more questions? I think we've had a couple of people sign off. I think a lot of people might have had something else at one. So I guess I just want to close on, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your input. We are continuing this journey. I mean, we're doing our kind of day job as well, but I really want to continue that journey of finding some good in this, of what can we learn about how to do change well in these very difficult times. As I said, we run free sessions every 3 to 4 weeks, so you can take a look on our website, and if you would like to be a speaker, or you know anybody that you think would make a great speaker, please do put us in touch. We run them all as panel sessions, and we're just keen to get the voices from as many people from different organisations as possible to get a rich picture. Our website is truemanchange.co.uk. We are on all of the social media channels. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter, and Facebook and Instagram. So do find us out, and give us a follow if you want to keep in touch. And I'm also on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect with me. And thank you again for your time.